It is good to be back again, worshiping together. It's great to be here. Great to worship together. Glad to have Mason back with us, and good to have everybody. I apologize for being dressed, I guess, so nice today. I've never, I've had a little bit of experience with, preachers and churches, and I've seen preachers heckled for not dressing nice, but I've not seen preachers heckled for dressing nice. So I don't know what to do about that, but alas, here we are. It's good to be with all of you this morning. I want to start by reading a few, I don't know what else to call them other than like memes, which you may not really know what that word means, but basically there's this Facebook page, this Instagram page, and it's called The Bible is Funny. They have a card game. I don't know if you've heard of the card game. The card game's great. But anyways, this Facebook, Instagram page, social media page, what they do is they take these different verses from various translations, admittedly often the Message because it's just funnier, and they take these verses and they take them out of context, and then they give a prompt. Some situation, and then they have this verse out of context, and you put the two together, and it's kind of funny. So I've got a few of those I'd like to read. So bear with me. Hopefully you'll laugh like I did. So it's school time, so their most recent post that I saw is about back to school kind of jokes. So you have a teacher calling roll, says something completely indecipherable, and then you have this kid whose name is always pronounced wrong, and he says, "Here I am." That's 1 Samuel 3:4. Teachers describing the class. "I love them, but they try to destroy me." Psalms 109:4. Teachers, when the principals, the admin, add another student to their class. This is from 1 Samuel 21:15. "Do I have such a shortage of crazy people that you brought this one to act crazy around me?" When you just finished a bowl of Fruit Loops and now they want you to talk about biology. Acts 2:15. 9 o'clock in the morning is much too early for that. Teacher, the bell does not dismiss you, I dismiss you. Teacher, 2 minutes after the bell, that's enough for now. You may leave. Acts 24:25. Okay, now I have some about husbands and wives. I'm glad these are getting such a good response and laughter. That's excellent. That really gives the preacher a boost of confidence. Wife, what do you think of this rug? Me, it's not my favorite. Wife, buys rug anyway. John 2:4. Woman, why do you involve me? Okay, this one's from Psalm 69:17. Calling my wife after the deli counter because I forgot what I was supposed to get. Answer me quickly, for I'm in trouble. Husband can't find something right in front of his face. Wife, do you have eyes but fail to see? Mark 8:18. Me, do you want to go to Target? Do you want me to go to Target with you? My wife, if you go with me, you will only be a burden. 2 Samuel 15:30. Genesis 21:26. Her makes weekend plans, shares the plan, reminds him about the plan. Him on Saturday morning. You didn't tell me, and today is the first time I heard about it. I've been there. Okay, so I bring all those up because there was one that I saw a number of years ago, back when I actually had social media. I'm never going to do that again, by the way. Just so you'll only have to endure that torture today. But anyways, I saw one a couple of years ago. I think I was in high school, senior year in high school. This is probably 4 or 5 years ago, and 5 years ago now. That's crazy. Anyways, and basically it said something. I don't remember. I couldn't find it. I didn't look for it. It's so far down. But it basically said something like, "Me when I'm asked to describe myself." Me when I'm asked to describe myself. And so I would like to. Well, there we go. This is what they said. Me when I'm asked to describe myself. Youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, so on and so forth. So I thought that would get a rise. Apparently it did. Okay, well, let's just call this "The Bible is not funny," apparently. So anyway, so if you don't recognize that verse, that comes from Daniel 1:4. So anyway, I thought that'd be a funny introduction to our series this morning, but apparently it was not, and we will never do that again. But we've been talking about fairy tales, right? We started this last week. We've been talking about these fairy tale stories of the Bible that are not actually fairy tales, but we often treat them like they are, and so we're trying to look at them with a fresh eyes, with, I guess, adult eyes, and say, how can we learn about God from this passage? What does this children's story teach me about my God, who is not just the God of children, but the God of all mankind? And so we've been doing that. Well, this morning we're going to be continuing on with the story of Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as we kind of refer to them more often. But anyway, so this story is, there's several stories actually right there. Daniel 1 through 4 is where we'll be. We're not going to look at just one story. And that's like, Caleb, you're going to really look at 4 chapters today? Yeah, we're going to look at 4 chapters today. And the reason I want to do that is because we kind of isolate these stories and we teach them individually in VBS. But I think these 3 stories that we typically look at quite a bit build up. They're stepping stones to this 4th story that, I don't know about you, but I was never taught in VBS. It's not a VBS story. But I think these 3 stories kind of build up to this story and really tell us a lot about God. So the story of Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel, where does this story begin? Well, it begins in Judah. And it doesn't stay there for long, because before they enter adulthood, they're ripped from their home territory, from the city of Jerusalem, or wherever they lived in Judah. They're ripped from that by the Babylonians. King Nebuchadnezzar took his army, he marched on Jerusalem, he besieged it, he conquered King Jehoiakim, I think that's right, Jehoiakim, and the timeline's a little confusing. I'm not really sure exactly when he took Jehoiakim to Babylon, but at some point he took Jehoiakim to Babylon. And I think before that, he took some of the young nobles, youths without blemish, who were skilled in wisdom and learning and all those things that I was hoping you would laugh at and you did not. But anyways, so he takes these young nobles to Babylon, but he doesn't just want to take these young Jewish men and just have them live in Babylon with him and just kind of be Jews in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is too prideful for that. He wants to make them Chaldeans. He doesn't want them to be Jews anymore. So he gives them new names. To Daniel, he gives the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, he gives the name, to Hananiah, he gives the name Shadrach. To Mishael, he gives the name Meshach. And to Azariah, he gives the name Abednego. And so he gives them these new Babylonian names, which we're really not sure what those names mean, whether they're names of gods or not. Belteshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar tells us, is the name of his god, or is one of the names of his gods, but we're not sure about the others. But either way, Nebuchadnezzar is trying to turn them from Judeans to Babylonians. And so then he teaches them the language and the literature of the Chaldeans. And anyways, Daniel and his 3 friends, they don't really have a big problem with this. I mean, it's probably, they're in this foreign land. This is not a great place for them to be. This is a foreign land with people who speak this foreign language. And they serve these foreign gods. But as far as we can tell from those first few verses of chapter 1, they're not super worried about this. This is not something that they're just like, no, you can't call me Shadrach. Like, I'm Hananiah. Like, we don't really see that. But there's one thing the king does that these 4 boys just cannot get behind. There's something that they just cannot allow themselves to partake in. And oddly enough, it's the king's food, the diet. And so we don't know whether it was catfish, or whether it was bacon, or whether it was young goat boiled in its mother's milk. We don't know what was not kosher. But either way, the food of the king's table was not kosher. And Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel said, we're not doing that. But they had to be tactful. You don't tell the king of Babylon, the greatest empire in the world, that you're not eating his food. You don't do that. And so Daniel goes to the chief of the eunuchs, who's kind of over all these young men, these young nobles, and he says, hey, can we not eat this food? And God brings him into the chief of the eunuchs' favor, but the chief of the eunuchs says, no, I can't do that. I'm scared of the king. And so Daniel goes, okay, well, who can I go to next? So he goes to somebody below the eunuch, I think. He may be above the eunuch, but I think he's below the eunuch. And he goes to this guard, who's kind of apparently over these 4 boys and maybe a few others. And he says, hey, I have an idea. Let's test the 4 of us with vegetables and water. And test everybody else with the king's food for just 10 days. This is a 3-year program. 10 days is nothing. So he says, just test us for 10 days, see what happens, and just compare us at the end of that. So the guard thinks, well, no harm, no foul, 10 days. If it doesn't go well, then I'll give him the king's food and it'll be fine. So after 10 days, what do you think happens? Does nothing happen? Or does something big happen? I mean, if you go on a diet for 10 days, what happens? Little to nothing, right? I mean, a diet in 10 days does almost nothing. But that is the complete opposite of what happens here. At the end of 10 days, Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael are completely come far and above the rest of the young men, come way healthier. I think some of the more literal translations say more plump, more full, like they're healthier in that fat sense, I guess, right? And so they're doing well, and so they continue that way for 3 years, and then at the end of the 3 years, this is kind of how the assessment comes together. So look with me in verses 17 through 20. At the end of the 3 years, this is kind of where they're at. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So we have this story that most of you have probably heard a lot. We teach it to children. It's a great story about how, ultimately, how whenever we trust God, whenever we obey God's laws, that is always what is best for us. Now, I'm not saying God's going to work a miracle every time we obey His laws. Like He worked a miracle here. But what I am saying is that when we trust God, when we follow God's path instead of our own, good things happen. God is at work, and God is glorified in that. Good things happen when we follow God. So whenever we look at this story, let's just get this real quick. Let's trust our God in every situation and obey Him no matter what. But I don't think this is the main point of Daniel 1 through. At least not the main point that I want us to see. So let's keep going. Second story. Y'all familiar with Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Nod your head like this. Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. Glad you're alive this morning. So, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? So, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. It puzzles him. It scares him. He's confused. He doesn't know what it means. And so, he has this dream, and he calls all his wise men, and he's like, I need you to tell me what my dream means. And they're like, okay, yeah, tell us what the dream is. And he goes, no. I want to know that the interpretation is sure. I want to know that the interpretation you tell me is what God wants me to know, because God is telling me something. And so he says, I want you to tell me the dream and then tell me the interpretation. Well, this, of course, is an impossible task. I mean, nobody can do that. And so these wise men are like, no, just tell us the dream. Like, we can't do that. And he goes, no, I want you to tell me the dream and then tell me what it means. And so they can't do that, so he ends up deciding to execute all of his wise men. And so he goes out, he sends his enforcer, and the enforcer goes out and gathers all these wise men. He's going to execute them. Well, eventually he gets to the house of Daniel. And he walks in, and he's, I guess, going to take Daniel and arrest him and execute him later. And Daniel's like, hold on. Why is this happening? So he explains the situation, and he goes, let me go to the king. So Daniel goes to the king. He asks for more time so that he can interpret the dream. He goes back to his house. He talks to his 3 friends again, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. And he says, guys, we've got to plead before God for mercy. We need God's mercy so that He'll tell us the dream, tell us the interpretation, so that we can save ourselves and save the rest of these wise men. Again, this is another VBS story that we love. And God reveals this dream to Daniel, or reveals the dream to Daniel that night. And then Daniel prays this prayer. I just want to read this prayer because this is very powerful. Daniel answered and said, this is verse 20 of chapter 2. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. So I think that's a great prayer just about the wisdom of God, about how God is sovereign over the world. And so fast forward, Daniel goes to the king. He tells him the dream. What's the dream? You've got this big statue, this dazzling statue, and it's got a head of gold. And then it's got chest and arms of silver. It's got a belly and thighs of bronze. And then it's got legs of iron and feet of iron and a mix of iron and clay. And then this rock that's hewn out of a mountain, but not by a human hand, this rock, this big stone, rolls in, I guess, or and crushes the statue. The statue is ground to chaff, powder, just thrown about in the wind. And then this stone grows into a huge mountain and covers the entire earth. If you dreamed that, I think you would be a little scared too, right? I mean, that's a pretty vivid dream. And there's obviously some meaning there. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know what it is, right? So Daniel explains. And he says, Nebuchadnezzar, you're that head of gold. You've got this great empire, the Babylonian Empire. You're that head of gold. The chest and arms of silver, that's a kingdom that's going to come after you. It's going to be a lesser kingdom. It's not going to be as good as yours. And then there's those belly and thighs of bronze. That's going to be another kingdom after that. And then there's going to be another kingdom. It's going to be as strong as iron, but it's going to have some weakness. Just like iron and clay don't mix, it's going to have some weakness that are going to be its downfall. And then this is what it says in chapter 2, verses 44 and following. Pick up with me there. This mountain, what is the rock? And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. So God, through Daniel, tells the king, hey, look, here's what I'm going to do in the future. I'm going to raise up my own kingdom. Not a kingdom of man, the kingdom of God. Obviously, I think we can see that's the Messianic kingdom of Christ. That this is the kingdom that belongs to Jesus, the kingdom that we're a part of today. This is going to be a kingdom that's going to never end. It's eternal. It's untouched by mankind. And it covers the entire earth. People of every nation, people of every language. God has a plan here to establish His kingdom. So Nebuchadnezzar learns this, and then this is how he responds. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. Then the king said to Daniel, truly your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. I want to read this again. Truly your God is the God of gods and the King and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. So, again, what do we learn from this VBS story that we've heard so many times? What do we learn? Well, first, I think we learn that God is wisdom personified. That whenever there's this mystery that needs to be revealed, to whom do we go other than God Himself? If we need wisdom, if we need instruction, let's go to God and seek that from Him. He's the revealer of mysteries. He is the one in whom is all wisdom and knowledge of the future and everything. Right? Let's go to God. But I think we also learn that God is in control. Oh, sorry, I missed. Anyways, okay. I think we also see that God is in control. That Nebuchadnezzar sees this unfolding of God's plan, and he's just an observer. He's an instrument of God, no doubt. He's being used by God, but he's just an observer. Ultimately, God is the one behind this, raising up kings and setting kings down. God is the one who is moving the plan forward to ultimately bring forth Christ and to establish His eternal kingdom. So God is in control. Let's observe His plan and trust Him in it. Let's observe His plan with awe and submit to it. God has a plan. Let's recognize it and submit to it. We've got this first story right. God's laws are better than ours. Let's trust Him and obey Him. We've got the second story that God is wisdom personified and that God is in control and He's got this plan. Let's trust Him through it. But then there's this third story that we also love, and it's about the fiery furnace. The fiery furnace. And so I'm recognizing I'm running short on time, and we're not done. So let me be quick here. The fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar sets up this magnificent statue. I think it's 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. And I know you know exactly what that means because we measure everything in cubits. No, right? So if you take an 18-inch cubit, that's about 90 feet by 9 feet. So it's insanely tall and very thin for its size, which makes it what? It looks even taller, right? Because it's so skinny. And so Nebuchadnezzar sets up this magnificent statue, and then he gets all his provincial officials, which includes Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he gets all his provincial officials, and he has them, he says, at the sound of the music, I want you to bow down and worship this image that I've set up. And so the music sounds, these three men, they don't bow down. Ray said I should have titled this lesson 3 Stand-Up Guys, because they didn't bow down, they stood up, right? Okay, and they were stand-up guys. Anyways, okay, y'all are not laughing today. That's great. So then Nebuchadnezzar says, if you don't bow down and worship this statue, I'm going to throw you in this fiery furnace. Well, they don't bow down. Nebuchadnezzar apparently is not the one who notices this. Some other officials, they're jealous of the fact that they didn't bow down. And so they come to Nebuchadnezzar and they say, these Jews are causing so much trouble. Those 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not bow down. So the king brings them to him and he says, y'all need to bow down to the statue. When you hear the music, bow down. And they say, no. Even if you throw us in the fire, we're not going to bow down. They said, our God is able to deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we will still not bow down to any other God. So Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, well, you've given me no choice. Makes the fire 7 times hotter, throws them in. The guards who threw them in died. Like, just think about that. I mean, you're being carried into this fiery furnace and thrown in, and you're alive, and the guard dies. I mean, just think about that. And then they're standing in the fire, and Nebuchadnezzar peers in, and he says, didn't we throw 3 guys in? And they go, yeah, 3 guys. And he goes, well, then why do I see a 4th one? One like the son of the gods. And that's an interesting thing, you know. Who is in the fire? Is it an angel? Is it pre-incarnate Jesus? You know. But anyways, regardless, God delivers these 3 men in the fire. God was in the fire with them, as Ray prayed in his prayer. I appreciated that. God was in the fire with them. He delivered them, and he brings them out. And I want you to pick up with me. I think it's, I got it in my notes. Chapter 3, I forgot what verse. Give me a second. Oh, I didn't write it down. Okay, perfect. Then Nebuchadnezzar came to the door. Okay, verse 26. I'm sorry. I should have wrote it down. Verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had no power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any other god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. Notice this. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Final VBS story. We love this one. It's one of my personal favorites, right? We serve a God who is able to save his people. Apparently that's not working unless I look at it. We serve a God who is able to save his people. Whether it's the fire, whether it's Satan attacking us, or whether we're just stuck in sin, we serve a God who is able to rescue and to save his people. Let's trust him. Let's rely on his merciful strength and his powerful grace. We serve an amazing God. So these 3 stories. We love them. We teach them to children. What are we going to get beyond the VBS, typical lesson? I think the things I've tried to summarize there are kind of the thing that we would teach to children, the thing that we typically look at. And I think the key to interpreting these 3 stories, at least in the way that I want to today, is to look at this next story. I know, a 4th one, I'm sorry. Chapter 4. What happens? Nebuchadnezzar, just look at Nebuchadnezzar's reactions first before we look at this. after the first story, Nebuchadnezzar sees these young men. He sees that they're 10 times better than all the rest. He sees that they have just truly, like, God has been at work in them. But he says nothing about God. He doesn't see God there. He just sees that they're 10 times better than the rest. Fast forward, the next story. He has Daniel interpret the dream. And he says, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. So he says, whoa, Daniel, whatever God you serve, that Yahweh character, he must be better than the rest in some way. But again, he's just one among many. In Nebuchadnezzar's eyes, Yahweh is just one among many. Well, then fast forward to that third story. He says, no other God can save like that. Nebuchadnezzar has gradually been seeing more and more about the God of the universe, has gradually been brought closer and closer, but he still has not submitted himself to God. And I know that because in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. And this dream is a dream of judgment, a judgment on Nebuchadnezzar. He sees this beautiful tree. It is this great tree. It reaches up into the heavens. There's all this fruit. Everybody eats from this tree. The cattle find shade in this tree. I mean, it is just a magnificent tree. And then he sees this messenger come down from heaven and say, chop down this tree. Bind up the roots. A couple of other things. And he's like, okay, this means something. What does this mean? So he has his wise men come, and none of them can interpret it. And then he has Daniel. He brings in Daniel, and he says, Daniel, I need you to interpret this dream because I know that the spirit of the gods are in you. And so again, he knows something's different about Daniel, but he's not giving his heart to God. So Daniel interprets the dream. He says, look, Nebuchadnezzar, I'm really sorry to tell you this. I wish this was about your enemies. That's what he says. I wish this was about your enemies, but it's about you. The God of heaven is going to cut you down. And you're going to be under his judgment for a while. You're going to go out, the dew is going to fall on your back. You're going to eat grass. And your hair is going to grow long, and your nails are going to grow long. And you're going to be under judgment for a period of time. Because you've not given yourself to God. And he says in chapter 4, verse 27, he says, therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. He wants Nebuchadnezzar to repent. He wants Nebuchadnezzar to not have to endure the judgment that God is bringing on him. What does Nebuchadnezzar do? Is to say, okay, Daniel, I'm going to repent. No. I don't know how much time passes. Well, I do actually. It says in verse 29, at the end of 12 months. So about a year later, he's walking on the rooftops of his palace, and he said, is this not great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty? And while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox. And 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. So Nebuchadnezzar has not submitted to God. He exalts himself. So God says, okay, Nebuchadnezzar, that's it. You're going to go out, you're going to live as a beast in the wilderness for 7 periods of time. I know, I'm sorry, this is getting long. You're going to live as a beast in the wilderness for 7 periods of time. What happens in that time? Nebuchadnezzar goes out, he lives like that. Pick up with me there. In verse 33. Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, and his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him who lives forever. This is what Nebuchadnezzar says. Arrogant, prideful Nebuchadnezzar, who never saw God, never exalted him, never gave his heart to him. This is what he says. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or say to him, what have you done? At the same time my reason returned to me, and the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my Lord sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. We don't typically teach this at VBS. This story of Nebuchadnezzar being a beast in the wilderness for 7 periods of time, I didn't really learn about that as a child. But I think that there's a valuable lesson here that I think we miss when we just look at this like a VBS children's fairy tale. That lesson is this: God was chasing Nebuchadnezzar. God wanted Nebuchadnezzar's heart. Those 3 stories of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those were stepping stones to the mission of God. And God's mission, I think, in Daniel was to win the heart of King Nebuchadnezzar. In the first story, Nebuchadnezzar didn't even see him. God revealed himself through the laws, the food laws, and the blessing he bestowed, but Nebuchadnezzar didn't see him. God revealed himself as a revealer of mysteries as he interpreted the dream through Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar saw him, but not fully. God revealed himself in the fire. He said, I can save these men from the fire, Nebuchadnezzar. I want you to see me. Nebuchadnezzar praises him, but doesn't give him his heart. And then finally, God judges him, brings down this judgment upon Nebuchadnezzar, so that Nebuchadnezzar will finally realize that God, Yahweh, and not Nebuchadnezzar, is the king of all the earth. The king who rules and is powerful and just and holy, and prays that he is truly the God of gods and the King of kings. And so what is my point this morning? I think when we look at this story, we need to see that God's mission has not changed. That just as he chased Nebuchadnezzar, he is chasing each and every one of us. That just as God wanted Nebuchadnezzar's heart, he wants yours. Just as God wanted Nebuchadnezzar's heart, he wants yours today. In Luke 15, there's 3 beautiful parables. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the prodigal son. God went, in metaphorical terms, God went and searched for the sheep because he wanted the sheep to be among his fold. God searched for the coin because he wanted the coin to be a part of his collection. It was precious to him. God waited with compassion and rushed to meet his son as he ran back to him after rejecting him for years. God will do the same for each and every one of us. God has revealed himself to us through Jesus Christ. He has shown us what a God he is, and he wants us to give him our hearts. He wants us to submit to his power, submit to his glory, and receive his grace. And if you've not done that this morning, I want to implore you that the God of heaven is seeking after you. The God of heaven is seeking after you just like he sought after Nebuchadnezzar. He wants you to be a part of his church. He wants you to be one of his people. He wants you to love him and to know that he loves you. If you have a need this morning, we'd love to pray with you, to study with you, to help you in any way that we can, so that you can answer God's call and have him bring you into his fold. If you have a need this morning, please come as we stand and sing.